Hey guys, Derek and
Paula here.
from a guy, a girl, and a camper van. So tonight is the night before Halloween. We just finished getting all of our jack-o'-lanterns carved and all of our candy ready for the trick-or-treaters tomorrow night. And now we're out relaxing beside a warm campfire.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. It's our first year here, so we really don't know what to expect, whether we're gonna get, 40 kids or 0 kids. We kind of suspect 0 kids.
Yeah, there's not too many houses on our road, so I don't think it's going to be a very popular spot for trick-or-treaters wanting a lot of candy.
Yeah.
I think they usually go to all the subdevelopments these days where there's a lot of houses all in one quick, easy spot.
Yep. That's okay. If there's candy left over, it's mine.
I'll fight you for it. So, since we're sitting next to a campfire,
Yeah.
did I ever tell you the story about the time that Andrew and I went for a walk in the woods behind my old place on Halloween night?
Yes, but you need to tell them.
All right, you guys up for a scary story for Halloween? Sit tight, I'll tell you one. So I should start off by mentioning that back when I was in college, I lived in a small little house in the country surrounded by a maple forest. One of my closest friends was in the same program at school and just happened to live nearby. So we often got together in the evenings to study and work on assignments at my house. Now this particular story takes place during the fall semester of our second year, when one of our professors thought it would be a great idea to schedule the due date for a major project on the morning of November 1st. The day after Halloween. So, that year, instead of getting ready for a costume party or heading out drinking, instead we were stuck at home putting the last-minute touches on our assignments for the following morning. By this point in our college career, we were pretty used to putting in long hours in front of the computer, or with our faces buried in books. But given that Halloween has always been one of my favorite holidays, I was finding it pretty hard to concentrate. So by around 10:30, after several hours of dedicated work, I suggested we take a break and go for a walk outside. Walks had become something of a staple leisure activity because we found that the fresh air and change of scenery helped to clear our heads. Plus, it was a good excuse to stretch our legs and talk about something other than school for a few minutes. So my buddy agreed to my suggestion, we grabbed our coats, threw a little flashlight in my pocket, and headed outside. We could see our breath in the cold air as we stepped out onto my porch. It was chilly, but refreshing, and the sweet smell of fallen leaves gave us a much-needed boost of energy. I could tell right away that this break was a good call. Now, some nights, when we were in a hurry, we'd just go for a short, easy walk down my quiet road. But on nights such as this, when we were having a really hard time concentrating, we'd instead head off aimlessly into the woods. So we crossed my backyard and headed toward the tree line, and as we slowly got further from the house, we became increasingly aware of the darkness. There were no stars to be seen, and the moon shone dimly through the wispy clouds and bare tree branches overhead. Plus, the falling temperatures meant that there were no crickets or frogs chirping in the background. So aside from our footsteps rustling leaves and snapping twigs, the night air was completely silent. We walked into the woods for a few minutes before we reached a small ridge that stretched on for several kilometers in either direction. Like second nature, we climbed to the top and followed it past familiar landmarks to the old abandoned sugar shanty, where they had produced maple syrup a century prior. Most of the old boiler equipment was still intact, and the lofts were still full of rusty old sap buckets. It was an interesting place to explore during the day, but by this point, a thin fog was starting to form under the undergrowth in the forest, and the cool breeze was causing it to swirl in and out of the open barn door. And when mixed with the faint light of the moon, the fog took on a spirit-like appearance. And given that this was Halloween and this place was starting to look creepy as hell, we picked up the pace until it was far behind us. By now we were fairly deep into the woods, and it was becoming more and more difficult to recognize just exactly where we were. So I reached into my jacket pocket for the flashlight and turned it on. Now keep in mind that this was long before LEDs were common, so the tiny mag light barely lit up 5 or 6 feet in front of us and did little more than highlight the building fog that was starting to surround us just outside of our reach. But still engrossed in conversation and not yet ready to get back to work, we trudged deeper and deeper into the forest until we reached the edge of a clearing, which was a problem, because I knew this forest really well, and there were no clearings in the direction I thought we were headed. So, realizing we must have made a wrong turn somewhere, we headed further into the clearing to try and figure out where the heck we were. But because of the now thick and impenetrable fog, it was only a matter of seconds before we became completely disoriented and couldn't even find the edge of the forest we had just stepped out of. Everywhere we turned, all we could see was more fog, lit by the pale yellow light of the flashlight. It was official. We were lost. But just then, my buddy thought he saw something ahead of us, so he nudged me. And as I aimed the flashlight, we could just barely make out something glowing just ahead of us. We took a few steps forward and immediately realized that it wasn't one thing. It was two. Two humongous eyes glowing back at us from the darkness. We instinctively jumped back a step out of fear, but remained silent. Running from a wild animal only serves to trigger its chase response, so standing your ground is almost always the right course of action. But these eyes were much bigger than any wild animal I'd ever encountered, and they just kept staring us down, unblinking, about 6 feet in the air. Then all of a sudden we heard a twig snap behind us, and we swung the flashlight around to see another set of eyes, and then another, and another, and another. We were completely surrounded in every direction, and each set of eyes was accompanied by a faint silhouette of some hulking beast. As we stood there, frozen by fear, all that I could hear over the pounding of my panic-induced heartbeat was the smacking of what I can only assume were blood-drenched lips, and the grinding of probably fanged teeth. Fearing the worst and preparing for a fight, we slowly stood back to back and got ready for whatever horror was about to fall upon us. We stood there silently for what felt like an eternity. Hearts racing and sweat slowly beating on our forehead, and then all of a sudden, out of the silence, one of the creatures took a deep breath and spoke. In the deepest, most booming voice, it simply said one word. Moo! Somehow in the darkness and the fog, we got disoriented, stumbled out of the forest and into the cattle farm that was just down the road from my house. So with our dignity in tatters and a huge sense of relief, we said goodnight to the cows and headed home, got back to work, and vowed never to speak of this again in public. So, shh. Don't tell anyone that I told you. So I hope you guys enjoyed the story.
Happy Halloween.